Well, here we are. It's spring 2022. It's always kind of nice to finally make it there. And one of the things that I like to do when the seasons change is write cards and correspond with people. And that got me thinking about the pens that I like to use for my correspondence the most. And those would be my 3 favorite desk pens, and sometimes 4. These are the pens that I enjoy using because of the feel, the weight, the sound. They're a complete experience, and these are pens that also are a little pricier, and so I don't take them out to go eat lunch and write letters and things like that when I'm there. These are pens that I sign my documents with and do other things that I consider a little more important. So I thought maybe I would share those pens with you. Well, not maybe. I'm going to share those pens with you. So let's take a look at those pens right now. These are my preferred pens that I keep at my desk. They don't really travel much, well, except for one. They don't really travel much. They stay here. And the first of those would be this Cipriano de Rossi by Scribo. This is a pen that's made for right here, an English company, and it's beautiful. I had an Omas nib, a flex nib on another pen, and I'd always wanted to replace that Omas pen, and I never had the chance. But Scribo, Scrittori Bolognese in Italy, they are made up of many of the personnel who worked at Omas and have many of the machines, and they were said to be a very close in design and function. And so when I saw this pen, the Cipriano de Rossi, the Tropea, I just had to have it, and I bought it a couple of years back. And it is the pen that I use most commonly for correspondence, for writing letters and sending things to my family and doing those kinds of chores, which aren't chores at all. I shouldn't say that. This is a wonderful writing pen, and it is a piston filler. But again, if you want to know more about these pens, there are plenty of people who've written very in-depth, done very in-depth blogs on these, or vlogs. And the other pen that I use commonly for signing documents, writing letters, and doing those things is my Mont Blanc 146. I love my 146. It is a favorite pen that I have been using for many, many years. Another pen that I have been using more often these days because of my hand is this Edison Collier. Now, originally I bought this pen to be kind of a travel companion. Less expensive. I could use disposable cartridges. And the reason why I wanted to use this for traveling is because if I travel with these pens, they're a little more expensive, the price point, so I don't want to really risk damaging or losing them. Another issue is they are piston fillers, and I can't really tell how much ink is inside of them, but if there's too much air in the pen and I'm driving over the Rockies, or if I get on a plane, the ink tends to blot out of the pens because of the changes in air pressure. So I started carrying this Collier using cartridges, and I could get little shorty cartridges that would fit in here. So after writing a few times, I could just toss the cartridge and not have to worry about wasting too much ink or the pen blowing up on me. But one of the things that I found that I didn't like about this pen is the Jowo nib unit. It tends to be a little dry, and so sometimes I would have some writing issues using that nib unit. But since then, I have changed this to an Independence nib unit, and this is a flex nib unit, and this pen writes really, really well now. And so this pen has now joined the fray. But in order to have a pen that I could travel with, I bought this Pilot Custom 823. Now, the 823 is a pen. I've had this pen since about 2017, and somewhere in there. I bought it shortly after I bought this pen and discovered I really didn't like the performance of this pen all that well, so I went out and bought this. And I really enjoy this pen when I'm traveling. One issue that I had with it is that the gold nib on this was so highly polished that it was a little over-polished and suffered a little baby's bottom. Now, the one advantage was that on cheap stationery, hotel stationery, this pen doesn't seem to have any trouble. With Rhodia paper or Clairefontaine, something like that, I can get some hard starting with this pen. But for the most part, it's a very reliable writer. And the reason why it usually stays inked up is just because I don't feel like removing the ink from the pen after I travel with it, and then I can just top it up when I go on a trip. And this pen holds a lot of ink, and the reservoir is, I can seal the reservoir off so that no matter how much air, as you can see there's a lot of air in it now, is in this pen. I only need to be careful when I release the blind cap here to make sure that it doesn't spurt out any ink. But otherwise, this pen travels really, really well, and I don't have any issues with taking it onto an airplane or in a car in a bag on a long trip without having to put it in a plastic bag to make sure it doesn't spew all over everything. So let's write a little bit with these pens. Now I have this inexpensive, like, $1.99 pad that I got at the supermarket or whatever. And the reason why I like to use this kind of paper for this sort of thing is I think it's a little more representational as far as the performance of the pen. And so the pen I've been using the most recently is this pen, only because of its weight, because of my hand. And this pen is the Edison Collier, and this pen has an Independence flex nib. This ink is the Noodler's Blue Elysium. I find that the Noodler's ink has good cohesion so that I don't get a lot of railroading with this nib. This nib unit is still a Jowo nib unit, and even though it's a generic gold nib that's been ground, the nib unit can still be a little dry. So for some types of inks, it won't perform very well. But I find that the Noodler's ink, the Blue Elysium, performs really well in this pen. And then I have my Scribo, right here. And this is also a flex nib. As you can see, I am no calligrapher. But I do like to write with flex nibs when I am corresponding, because the line variation is a little more fun. It's a little more interesting. I think that it adds a little visual interest to the words themselves. And I like the sensation. I enjoy the bounciness of the nib as I write. And this pen is a little back heavy. I was going to save up to buy an actual Scrittoli Bolognese, but I didn't really like the pen design, and I was really on the fence because the pen was really back heavy. And though this pen still suffers a little bit of that, it is a much more behaved pen. And this pen has no trouble with any ink I put into it. It always flows well. And I believe that is due in part to the fact that it has this wonderful ebonite feed. And though this nib isn't up to the performance of my Scribo that I had, my Omas nib that I had when I was a young man, it's good. It's good enough. And I must say, it is a chatoyant beauty. This pen is just gorgeous. I love the material this pen's made out of. And I could go into more detail about this pen, but I just want to kind of do the overview. Then, of course, there's my favorite Mont Blanc 146. And I love this pen. This is a fine nib. Now, these are all fine nib pens. Flex pens, typically, they're going to be fine nib because that way you can see more line variation. I just cleaned this pen, and so I'm not getting a lot of line variation because the nibs has a lot of water in it for this pen. That's one of the reasons the line isn't that good. But I like I like the fine nibs. The extra fine is too fine. I don't enjoy writing letters with an extra fine nib. And lastly, I have my Pilot. Custom 823. And this is a medium. Now, the reason why I have a medium nib in this pen is because if you look, you can see that the line is very similar, especially when I'm writing on this inexpensive paper. You can see how this paper tends to feather out. And again, with this pen, I had a little baby's bottom issue going on with it. So when I use it on other types of paper, like Rhodia paper or Clairefontaine, it can be a bit of a hard starter. But it gives me absolutely no issues on cheap hotel manuscript paper that I find hiding in a drawer. And so this pen is a great companion to take on trips. And I enjoy using all of these pens. Now, this, of course, again, is the Noodler's ink. This is the Platinum Pigmented Blue. And I know pigmented inks in a piston filler pen like this, not necessarily the best idea. But I have a watchman who takes care of my pen, and he uses the sonic cleaner on it. He removes the nib unit and puts in a sonic cleaner. I used to have my own sonic cleaner, but I got tired of my teeth falling out, so I just take it to him, and I have him clean it a couple of times a year, or if I have any issues, and the pen always comes back. I've only owned this pen for a few years, as opposed to these other pens. This one I've owned practically all my life, and these two pens I've owned since about 2017. But I changed the nib unit out on this pen in about 2019, right at the beginning of the pandemic, like really late 2020. I got that nib unit ordered for this pen. It was a good thing I did because I was writing a lot of letters. But these are the pens that I like to keep at home for doing things like correspondence. I have a number of other pens, like my everyday carry pen that I take with me, like it's this Platinum Profonte. And it's a great pen for carrying. I keep Diatramentis Document Black in it because if I lose this pen, it's not a big deal. But these are pens that I like to write with and keep at home. These pens are special to me. And it isn't just that they tend to be a little more pricey. It is that the tactile feel of the pen in my hand, the sound of the nib scratching across the paper, the longer tines, they practically sing a little song while I'm writing. And the sensation of the weight of the pen in my hand. Now, of course, I did have that problem, which is why I ended up with using the Edison Collier, because it is an extremely lightweight pen, which at first I didn't know if lightweight was going to be good with a flex nib. But I find that it hasn't really affected anything, because I used to believe that a heavier pen with a flex nib would be better because it sort of aids in that natural accentuation of line variation. But I haven't really found that to be the case. This pen's nib is definitely more stiff than this one. That's why we see more line variation in it. And this is the pen that I tend to use the most. And this is the pen I tend to use second. I prefer to use permanent inks, but this is the only pen that I currently have a permanent ink in. And if I want to sign a document with black permanent ink, then I use, of course, I just grab this pen. But these are the pens that I enjoy using for writing personal correspondence, for signing documents that I think might be important to me. And they are a pleasure to own, they're a pleasure to use. And I feel very fortunate to be able to have them. And there are, of course, other pens I would like to have, but I don't need anything except these. And so I just thought I would share them with you. And I hope that you have a good week, and see you next time.